I walked past the brutalist slab of the municipal records building every day for 7 years before I noticed the seam. It is a jagged vertical hairline fracture in the granite cladding, located exactly 42 inches above the pavement. To the casual observer, it is a settling crack, a minor failure of modern engineering. But look closer. Ask yourself why the granite above the seam is a porous, salt-bleached grey, while the stone beneath it, visible only through that narrow aperture, is a dense, impossibly smooth red porphyry. This isn't a single structure, it is a skin, a graft. The official blueprints, filed in the very basement I was investigating, claim the building was commissioned in 1964. They speak of poured concrete and steel rebar. They detail the triumph of the Great Society's architectural vision, but the red porphyry tells a different story. It is a stone that requires diamond-tipped saws to cut today, yet here it sits, serving as a silent subterranean foundation for a building that officially should not have one. Not a basement, not a cellar, a precursor. I began to realize that we are living in a world of architectural ventriloquism, where modern institutions speak through the mouths of giants they have buried. The anomaly isn't just in the stone, it's in the silence. When I requested the original excavation surveys, I was met with a practiced institutional shrug. Lost in a fire. Water damage from a 1978 pipe burst. Misfiled. The erasure is methodical. It is a form of bureaucratic amnesia designed to ensure we never look down. But I did look down. I spent 3 weeks navigating the steam tunnels that snake beneath the city's administrative district. What I found was not the chaotic utility sprawl of a mid-century metropolis. I found symmetry. I found vaulted arches that distribute load with a mathematical precision that defies the crude, primitive tools we are told were available during the city's supposed founding. The arches aren't just supporting the street, they are remnants of a high-tech civilization that understood resonant frequency and geomantic placement. Not the settlers, not the pioneers, something else. Something that was here before the maps were drawn. We are told the city was carved out of the wilderness, but the deeper you go, the more it looks like the city was merely unearthed, stripped of its original purpose and rebranded. Consider the concept of the Star Fort. In official history, these are defensive fortifications designed to withstand cannon fire. But ask yourself why these identical, geometrically perfect patterns appear on every continent, often in places where no such defensive need existed. Then, look at the footprints of our modern government offices. The Pentagon, the State Department, the regional tax offices. When viewed from above, the geometry is unmistakable. They are built directly into the nodes of a global energetic grid. This is not a coincidence of geography. It is a seizure of infrastructure. They didn't build these offices to govern us. They built them to sit on top of the power sources. They are the ultimate squatters. By placing a dull grey office block over a resonant crystalline foundation, they dampen the frequency. They turn a temple of free energy into a labyrinth of paper and debt. It is a grand suppression, a literal weighting down of the past to prevent the future from rising. What if the Great Fire of every major city in the late 1800s wasn't an accident? What if it was a controlled demolition, a clearing of the upper floors to make room for the new tenants? The paper trail for the red porphyry led me to a defunct geological firm that specialized in archaeological remediation. It is a curious term. Usually, we remediate toxins or waste. Why remediate history? I found their records in a mold-heavy storage unit on the outskirts of the city. The ledgers describe non-conforming subterranean anomalies discovered during the construction of the Justice Plaza. The engineers were ordered to pour thousands of tons of concrete into the voids, not to stabilise the ground, not to prevent sinkholes, to fill the spaces. They were filling rooms that had no doors. They were sealing chambers that contained technology they couldn't explain and didn't want us to find. The cost was astronomical. It would have been cheaper to build elsewhere, but they couldn't leave it exposed. Institutional gatekeeping isn't just about what they tell us in textbooks, it's about what they physically bury in the earth. Every time you pay a fine or file a permit in those buildings, you are walking over a silenced empire. You are standing on the roof of a world that didn't use money. Observe the windows, not the ones at eye level, but the ones that sit half buried in the sidewalk. We are told these are light wells for basements. But why would you build a basement with 10-foot ceilings, ornate crown moulding, and massive stone fireplaces? Why would you build a ground floor that begins 5 feet below the street level? The mud flood theory is often dismissed as internet fantasy, but the evidence is literally under our boots. These buildings weren't built with basements. The street level was raised. A global event, or perhaps a series of them, deposited layers of silt across the civilized world, and the founders of our modern era simply dug out the top floors and claimed they built the whole thing. The government offices are the worst offenders. They are the primary beneficiaries of this stolen legacy. They took the grandest structures, the palaces of Tartaria, and turned them into the DMV, the post office, and the courthouse. They turned the high cathedrals of a lost age into the cubicle farms of the present. Not evolution, not progress, a downgrade. What if the history we are taught is merely a script written to explain away the ruins? We see the massive domes and the Greco-Roman columns, and we are told they were built by men with horse-drawn carriages and hand saws. We are told they finished these sprawling complexes in 18 months. Ask yourself if that is possible today with all our cranes and CAD software. It isn't. The math doesn't work. The logistics are a lie. The World's Fairs of the 19th century were not temporary exhibitions of progress. They were the final liquidation sales of the old world. They fenced off the existing Tartarian cities, called them exhibitions, and then systematically dynamited them once the public had been sufficiently distracted. All that remained were the stone foundations, upon which they erected the bland, functionalist structures of the modern state. They kept the foundations because the foundations are the source of the power. They provide the grounding for a system that requires total control over the physical and energetic landscape. I found a technician who worked on the HVAC systems for the federal building. He told me about the dead zones, areas where the air doesn't circulate, where the temperature drops 20 degrees without reason, and where electronic equipment fails systematically. These 8 zones correspond exactly with the layout of the old foundations. The modern building is a parasite, and the host is still twitching. The red porphyry, the granite, the basalt, these aren't just building materials, they are conductors. When the original architects laid these stones, they were creating a circuit. The government offices act as insulators, breaking the circuit, grounding the current so it can't be used by the people. It is a form of spiritual shielding. They live in the penthouse of a machine they don't understand, but they know enough to keep the basement locked. The erasure trope is most effective when it is physical. You don't have to burn the books if you just build a parking lot over the library. Every city has a Capitol Hill or a civic centre that feels older than the rest of the town. The stone is weathered differently. The proportions are slightly off, as if designed for people who are 4 inches taller and far more graceful. These are the nodes. I tracked the load distribution of the City Hall annex and found that the central pillars support 4 times the weight of the actual building. Why? Because they were designed to support something much larger, something that reached higher into the sky, perhaps even something that harvested atmospheric electricity. The domes weren't for aesthetics, they were for collection. The modern antennas and satellite dishes we see on top of government buildings today are crude, ugly imitations of the elegant energy harvesting spires that once stood there. We have replaced a wireless, free energy civilization with a wired, metered, and taxed society. The offices are the collection points for that tax. They are the physical manifestation of the transition from abundance to scarcity. The institutional amnesia is reinforced through the pioneer narrative. We are told that our ancestors arrived at a blank slate, but the wilderness was actually a graveyard. The government offices were built on top of the foundations because the infrastructure was already there. The sewers, the conduits, the levelled ground, it was all provided. All the founders had to do was put up new signage and write new laws. They are not the creators of our civilization. They are the estate executors of a deceased relative whose will they burned. When you walk through the marble halls of a state house, listen to the echoes. They don't sound right. The acoustics are designed for a different kind of speech, a different kind of resonance. They are designed for a frequency that our modern language of bureaucracy cannot reach. Not silence, not noise, a hum, a low, persistent vibration that still moves through the red porphyry. Is it possible to reclaim what was lost, or is the burial too deep? The deeper I dig into the archives and the steam tunnels, the more I realize that the evidence is hidden in plain sight. It is in the ornamental ironwork that looks suspiciously like circuitry. It is in the decorative statues that are positioned exactly at the intersections of ley lines. It is in the very thickness of the walls of the county jail. The government offices are not just where they work, it is where they hide the truth about who we are and where we came from. We are a species with amnesia, living in the ruins of our own greatness, governed by people who tell us the ruins are new construction. As the sun sets over the municipal records building, the shadow it casts doesn't match its shape. For a brief moment, in the low light, you can see the ghost of the spire that used to be there. Ask yourself, if the foundation is a lie, what does that make the building? What does that make the law? What does that make us? The loop remains open. The red porphyry is still there, waiting. The red porphyry was merely the beginning, the descent. Beyond the physical stone lies the architectural geometry of containment. I spent months mapping the coordinates of every federal building constructed between 1870 and 1920 across the continental United States. When plotted, they do not follow the logic of population density or commerce. They follow the logic of a circuit board. Ask yourself why a small, dusty outpost in the high desert of Nevada requires a post office built with 3-foot thick granite walls and copper-domed ventilation shafts that lead to nowhere. It is not for the mail, it is for the stabilization of the grid. These buildings are pins in a map holding down a landscape that wants to shift. The institutional erasure is so complete that we view these structures as monuments to civic pride, when they are actually the grounding wires of a planetary dampening field. The Beaux-Arts movement was not a revival of aesthetics, it was a standardized rebranding of Tartarian power stations. Not art, not culture, infrastructure. I tracked a retired structural surveyor who had been tasked with seismic retrofitting the foundations of the old mint in San Francisco. He spoke of the frequency problem. During the drilling process, the diamond bits would hit certain sections of the pre-existing masonry and shatter instantly. It wasn't just hardness, it was vibration. The stone was singing. He described a subterranean chamber beneath the lowest vault where the walls were lined with a translucent mica that glowed with a faint bioluminescent blue when the city's power grid spiked. The official orders were to coat the mica in lead-lined concrete and strike the chamber from the record. Why? Because the old mint wasn't just a place to strike coins. It was a place where the Earth's natural energy was converted into a tangible, liquid asset. The government didn't just take over the building, they hijacked the battery. They turned a source of universal wealth into a factory for fiat currency. They replaced the glow of the earth with the green of the bill. Not wealth, not value, control. The transition from the old world to the new was not a slow evolution, but a violent systemic overwriting. I found evidence of re-education camps disguised as orphanages during the late 1800s. The children of the old world, the survivors of whatever cataclysm deposited the silt, were gathered into these massive stone institutions. Their heritage was stripped, their language was corrected. They were told their parents were savages or settlers who died of cholera. They were taught to look at the ruins around them and see only new construction. This is the core of the institutional gatekeeping. You don't need to hide the buildings if you can rewrite the minds of the people living in them. The schoolhouses themselves were often built directly over the most resonant Tartarian sites. By placing children in these energetic dead zones, the state ensured a generation of compliant, disconnected workers. What if your ancestors didn't cross an ocean? What if they were already here and the offices were built to keep them from remembering? Consider the concept of load distribution in the context of the social contract. The government offices are designed to be heavy, excessively heavy. They utilize massive columns and thick pediments to create a psychological sense of permanence and unmovability. This is a deliberate contrast to the lightness and ethereal nature of the original Tartarian structures, which often featured slender spires, vast glass expanses, and floating arches. The modern state wants you to feel small. It wants you to feel the weight of the stone. It uses the stolen foundations to anchor a reality that is intentionally dense and difficult to navigate. Not freedom, not lightness, gravity. I found a series of classified memos from the Department of the Interior regarding the stabilization of anomalous historical sites. The language is cold, pseudo-academic. They speak of curating the narrative landscape. They don't want history to be a living thing. They want it to be a taxidermied specimen, stuffed and mounted in a glass case. The tunnels beneath Washington, D.C. are not for transportation. They are for ventilation, but not for air. I gained access to a restricted engineering report detailing the atmospheric ion levels within the basement of the Smithsonian Institution. The levels are consistently 10 times higher than the surface. The original foundations of the capital city were designed as a giant atmospheric energy harvester. The obelisks, the domes, the reflecting pools. It was a machine for pulling electricity from the air. When the current regime took over, they couldn't turn the machine off, so they diverted it. They channeled the energy into the subterranean vaults to power their own secret projects, leaving the public to pay for coal and oil. We are told the Industrial Revolution was a leap forward, but what if it was a forced pivot away from free energy toward a model of total dependence? The government offices are the meters on our lives. They are the valves that control how much light we are allowed to receive. I discovered a pattern in the masonry marks found on the hidden foundations of state capitals from Oregon to Georgia. They are not the marks of stonecutters. They are linguistic, not a language of words, but a language of geometry, a series of interlocking circles and ratios that correspond to the harmonic frequencies of the human heart and brain. When you stand in the center of the rotunda of a Tartarian-based Capitol building, you are standing in a resonance chamber designed to elevate consciousness. But look at what they have placed in those centers today: security checkpoints, metal detectors, plastic dividers, fluorescent lights. They have introduced noise into the system to disrupt the signal. They are using the architecture against us. They have turned the amplifier into a jammer. Ask yourself why you feel exhausted after a day spent in a government building. It isn't just the bureaucracy, it is the energetic drain of a building that is actively working to suppress your frequency. The erasure trope is most visible in the way we treat our basements. In any other era, the lower levels of a building were functional, breathable spaces. Today, they are the underground. They are associated with darkness, secrets, and decay. This cultural conditioning prevents us from exploring the very places where the evidence is most abundant. I found a map of the lost sub-levels of the Chicago Loop. There are streets down there, entire storefronts with ornate glass windows now buried under 30 feet of fill. The city didn't grow, it climbed. It climbed on top of the corpses of the previous civilization to escape the rising tide of mud and the rising tide of truth. The government offices were the first to be razed, ensuring they always held the high ground in the new reality. They are the gatekeepers of the vertical plane. They decide what is ground level and what is buried. What if the founding fathers were actually the finding fathers? I looked into the private journals of early city surveyors. They don't write about designing the city layouts. They write about discovering the alignments. They talk about clearing the brush to reveal the stone plazas. The narrative of the brave architect starting with a blank piece of paper is a myth manufactured by the institutional gatekeepers to justify their ownership of the land. They are not the authors, they are the editors. They took a masterpiece and crossed out all the parts they didn't like. They replaced the poetry of the Tartarian foundations with the prose of the administrative state. Not creation, not vision, plagiarism. The red porphyry I found in the municipal records building is the smoking gun of this theft. It is a piece of a world that didn't belong to them, which they have claimed by right of burial. The staccato rhythm of the city is the sound of the machine, the sirens, the jackhammers, the screeching tires. It is all designed to keep us from hearing the hum of the red porphyry. But sometimes, in the dead of night, when the power grid fluctuates, the mask slips. I've stood outside the Justice Plaza at 3 a.m. and heard it, a low-frequency throb that makes the marrow of your bones vibrate. It is the sound of the foundation trying to breathe through the concrete. It is the sound of a suppressed history reaching out. The government offices are somber, not because they are serious, but because they are heavy with the weight of what they are hiding. They are the sarcophagi of a golden age. We walk through them every day, paying our taxes and filing our grievances, unaware that we are treading on the ceiling of a much greater world. The philosophical open loop remains. If the foundations were built for a different kind of humanity, what happens when we finally wake up to the frequency? The institutional erasure can only last as long as the concrete holds. But concrete has a lifespan. It cracks, it crumbles, it erodes. The red porphyry, however, is eternal. It was here before the records were lost, and it will be here after the offices are empty. We are approaching a point of structural failure, not just in the buildings, but in the narrative itself. The skepticism of authority is growing because the authority is built on a lie that is literally beneath our feet. Ask yourself, what happens when the skin of the building finally falls away? What happens when the graft fails? What happens when the foundations are no longer hidden? We are living in a countdown disguised as a bureaucracy. The investigation is not over. It has only just begun to reach the bedrock. The deeper I probed, the more the red porphyry revealed itself not as a foundation, but as an anchor for a global silencing. I tracked the geological signatures of these pre-existing stones to a series of coordinates that official maps label as empty wilderness or military exclusion zones. These are the quarry sites of the old world, but they are not quarries in the traditional sense. They are scars, massive geometric excavations that suggest the stone was not cut, but synthesized or vibrated out of the earth. The government offices we inhabit are the beneficiaries of this synthetic lithography. I obtained a chemical analysis of a core sample taken from the sub-basement of the Department of Agriculture. The mineral composition does not match any known terrestrial vein. It contains trace amounts of iridium and a crystalline lattice that suggests it was formed in a high-pressure, zero-gravity environment, not from the Earth, not from the stars, from a technology that viewed matter as programmable. The institutional gatekeeping surrounding these materials is absolute. When the results of the mineral test were uploaded to a private server, the connection was severed within 40 seconds. Not a glitch, not a timeout. Interception. The state does not just monitor our movements, it monitors the frequency of our discoveries. They are terrified that we will realize that the stone beneath our feet is actually hardware. The government buildings are the interfaces. They are the terminals where the administrative state plugs into the ancient planetary operating system. Ask yourself why every major federal building is topped with a copper or gold leaf dome. In modern physics, these are Faraday cages or resonant cavities. They are designed to trap and redirect the very atmospheric energy the foundations are pulling from the crust. We are told they are symbols of enlightenment. In reality, they are capacitors. They are storing the stolen lightning of a dead civilization to power the surveillance of the living. I followed the trail of the Faraday domes to a series of decommissioned psychiatric hospitals built in the late 19th century. These structures, often more palatial than the state capitals themselves, were the processing centres for those who could still hear the old world. If a citizen spoke of the humming stones or the lights in the sky, they weren't debated, they were institutionalized. The state used the very architecture of Tartaria to break the minds of the Tartarians' descendants. I found architectural drawings for a hydrotherapy wing that was actually a series of resonance chambers designed to scramble the human nervous system using the building's own acoustic properties, not healing, not medicine, erasure. They took the instruments of harmony and used them for discord. They turned the sanctuaries of the soul into the prisons of the psyche. This is the somber reality of our civic heritage. It is built on the ruins of a sanity we no longer possess. The skeptics will point to the labour records. They will show you the black and white photographs of men in flat caps standing on scaffolding. But look at the shadows. Look at the edges of the frames. The men are not building, they are cleaning. They are scraping off the soot and the mud to reveal the pristine stone underneath. They are the stagehands in a grand theatrical production of construction. I analysed a famous photograph of the construction of the US Treasury building. The cranes, visible in the background, are structurally incapable of lifting the multi-ton blocks they are purportedly positioning. They are props, decorative lattices designed to give the illusion of industry. The building was already there. It had been there for centuries, buried up to its second-story windows. The construction was merely an excavation and a rebranding. The government is not a builder. It is a squatter that specialises in renovation and historical forgery. Consider the post office phenomenon. In the early 20th century, thousands of nearly identical, massive stone post offices appeared across the landscape. They were built with a speed and a precision that defies the economic reality of the Great Depression. Ask yourself why a government supposedly broke and struggling would spend millions on marble foyers and bronze cast heating grates for small town mail distribution. The answer is connectivity. These buildings were the relay stations for the old grid. By turning them into post offices, the government ensured that every town had a direct physical link to the centralised power structure. They didn't want the mail, they wanted the nodes. They wanted to ensure that no part of the country could operate outside the frequency of the state. It was the first internet, and it was built of stone and copper. Not communication, not service, synchronization. The urban exploration of these sites is a dangerous game of narrative chicken. I entered a service corridor beneath the state capital of Ohio and found a door that had been welded shut from the outside. Through a small gap in the seal, I lowered a fibre optic camera. The room beyond was not a storage closet. It was a laboratory. It contained rows of glass cylinders, each filled with a heavy silver liquid that pulsed in time with the building's own vibration. This is the mercury power that the revisionist historians speak of. It is the fuel of the old world, a liquid metal that, when spun at high speeds in a magnetic field, creates anti-gravitational and free energy effects. The government offices aren't just sitting on the foundations, they are actively mining them for this red mercury. They are scavengers picking over the high-tech carcass of a titan. What we call national security is actually the protection of this scavenged tech. The language of the state is staccato because it is a language of commands, not of truths. It is designed to be read, not felt. This is in direct opposition to the language of the stones used by the Tartarian builders. I found that the ratios of the windows in the Department of Justice correspond to the mathematical intervals of a dissonant musical chord. Standing in front of the building creates a subconscious feeling of unease, of being judged. This is not accidental. It is architectural warfare. They have used the technical terms of load distribution and structural integrity to mask a program of psychological suppression. They are building a world that is structurally sound but spiritually hollow. The buildings are designed to be cold because the state operates in the absence of heat, not life, not warmth, entropy. What if the great discoveries of the modern age, the light bulb, the radio, the internal combustion engine, were actually just degraded, primitive versions of the technologies found in the basements of these government buildings? We are given the safe versions, the versions that require a meter, the versions that can be turned off if we don't pay. The founders found the blueprints for a world of abundance and decided it was more profitable to run a world of debt. They took the infinite and made it finite. They took the red porphyry and hid it under a layer of grey paint. The institutional erasure is the greatest heist in human history. It is the theft of our collective potential, executed by men in suits who claim to be our representatives. They don't represent us, they represent the interests of the burial. The erasure trope works because we want to believe in progress. We want to believe that we are the pinnacle of human achievement. To admit that we are living in the ruins of a superior culture is to admit that we have failed. It is to admit that we are the barbarians who moved into the Roman villas and used the marble for lime. But the evidence is too loud to ignore. It is in the way the light hits the granite at noon. It is in the way the air feels before a thunderstorm. It is in the lost blueprints and the misfiled surveys. The government offices are the smoking guns. They are the physical proof that the past was not what we were told. They are the heavy, sombre monuments to a truth that is waiting to be unearthed. Not tomorrow, not someday, now. The investigative essayist does not look for answers, they look for the seams, and the seams are everywhere. They are in the cracked pavement of the Justice Plaza. They are in the redacted lines of the geological reports. They are in the eyes of the bureaucrats who know the basement is off limits. We are being invited to investigate alongside the very stones that have been silenced. The pattern is clear. The global pattern of erasure, of institutional gatekeeping, and of structural suppression. But the foundations are shifting. The red porphyry is vibrating harder than the concrete can handle. We are reaching the end of the script. The philosophical open loop is tightening. If the building is a lie and the foundation is the truth, where do you choose to stand? The investigation continues, even as the walls begin to sweat. Not the end, not the beginning, the reveal. The vibration is no longer a sound, it has become a pressure. I spent the last 48 hours in the subvaults of the National Archives, not looking at the documents, but measuring the floor. Standard architectural practice dictates a floor thickness of perhaps 12 to 18 inches for a building of this scale. My ultrasonic sensor returned a reading of 14 feet. 14 feet of solid, non-porous, obsidian-grade basalt. Ask yourself why a repository for paper needs a floor that could withstand a direct hit from a tectonic shift. It isn't to protect the declarations or the treaties. It is to seal the breach. Below that 14-foot plug lies the terminal of the Atlantic ley line. The archives were not built to house our history. They were built to anchor it. They are the paperweights of the soul. The state knows that as long as the physical evidence of the old world's energy grid is capped with the leaden weight of bureaucracy, the collective memory of the populace will remain dormant. Not a library, not a vault, a dampener. I tracked the movement of reclamation teams that operate under the cover of municipal utility repairs. These are not plumbers or electricians. They are the recovery specialists for the institutional gatekeepers. I watched from the shadows of a flooded alleyway as they extracted a series of brass cylinders from a trench outside the Department of Labour. The cylinders were etched with cuneiform-like markings that appeared to shimmer with an internal phosphorescent heat. They didn't put them in a tool truck. They put them in a lead-lined transport vehicle marked with the seal of the Department of Energy. The workers didn't speak. They moved with the practiced sombre efficiency of priests performing a burial. This is the industrial erasure in real time. Every day, the last artifacts of the Tartarian infrastructure are being pulled from the earth and moved to the black sites, the modern-day catacombs where the state hides its stolen fire. Not repair, not maintenance, extraction. Consider the great fires of the 19th century through the lens of thermal demolition. I analysed the fire records of the 1871 Chicago blaze and the 1906 San Francisco earthquake. The official narratives speak of wooden shanties and overturned lanterns, but look at the photographs of the ruins. The brick is melted, the granite is vitrified. Wood fires do not reach the temperatures required to liquefy stone. These were not accidents of urban planning, they were precision strikes. The fires were the cover for the systematic deconstruction of the Tartarian energy collectors. The government offices were then erected over the cleared land to ensure the site was never re-excavated by the public. We are told the pioneers rebuilt the cities with grit and determination. What if they merely scraped the slag off the foundations and built a facade of normalcy? The modern skyline is a scar tissue. It is the visible evidence of a wound that has never been allowed to heal. The point of view of the investigator is necessarily one of isolation. The more you see the pattern, the more the world feels like a stage set. I stood in the centre of the Federal Triangle and realised that the load distribution of the entire district is mathematically linked to the position of the stars in the 14th century, not the 20th. The architects of the 1930s claimed they were honouring neoclassical traditions, but they were actually following a template they found in the sub-basements. They were filling in the blanks of a much older, much more complex map. Ask yourself why the government is so obsessed with Greek and Roman columns. It is not an aesthetic choice. The column is a resonator. It is a stone tuning fork. By replicating the form without the function, the state creates a hollow resonance, a white noise that interferes with the natural frequency of the human biofield. They have built a giant white noise machine and called it the Capitol. I found a disgruntled former cartographer for the US Geological Survey who had been tasked with smoothing the topographical maps of the Midwest. He showed me the originals. The land wasn't flat, it was terraced. It was a series of massive geometric earthworks that stretched for hundreds of miles, perfectly aligned with the foundations of the regional state houses. The settlers didn't clear the forest, they cleared the ruins. The government offices were placed at the apex of these terrace systems to act as the new heads of the old body. This is the erasure trope taken to a continental scale. They didn't just hide the buildings, they hid the shape of the earth itself. They renamed the mounds hills and the canals rivers. They turned a planetary machine into a natural landscape. What if the map you use to navigate your life is a deliberate obfuscation of the ground you walk on? The language of the investigator must be staccato, because the truth is being delivered in bursts through the static. Not this, not that, something else. Something that requires a technical understanding of resonant frequency and institutional gatekeeping. I spent a week in the archives of a defunct telegraph company. I found that the original telegraph lines weren't powered by batteries. They were plugged into the grounding spikes of the old Tartarian buildings. They were harvesting the ambient charge of the earth. When the government took over the lines, they introduced resistance. They forced the energy through meters. They turned a free, flowing river of information into a toll road. The government offices are the toll booths. They are the points where the natural flow of human connectivity is intercepted, filtered, and taxed. This is the somber reality of our interconnected world. It is a world of artificial barriers built over an open plain. The skeptics of authority will ask for proof, but the proof is in the silence of the gatekeepers. I requested the foundation surveys for the New York Supreme Court. The response was a single page, redacted so heavily it looked like a crossword puzzle for the blind. Why redact the depth of a building's piles? Why hide the material of its footings? Because the footings aren't concrete. They are the same red porphyry found in the Municipal Records building. They are the conductive elements that link the judiciary to the energetic grid. The law is not just a set of rules, it is a frequency. By conducting the law through these ancient stones, the state gives its decrees a weight they do not naturally possess. They are using the earth's own gravity to hold us down. Not justice, not order, suppression. We are living in a revisionist documentary that is being filmed in real time, but the cameras are pointed the wrong way. They point at the politicians. They should be pointing at the basements. I found a tunnel in the basement of a condemned post office in Cincinnati that led directly into a vaulted chamber made of solid, polished copper. The air inside was ionized. My hair stood on end. The walls were etched with diagrams of atmospheric energy harvesters, the very domes that sit atop our government offices. This was the back room of the post office, a place where the mail was never meant to go. It was a power substation for the old world. The government didn't build it. They just moved in and put a keep out sign on the door. This is the essence of the theft. They have taken the common heritage of humanity and rebranded it as classified. The philosophical open loop of this part of the investigation is the question of the second skin. If the government offices are a graft, what happens when the host rejects the transplant? The red porphyry is older than the state. It is more patient than the bureaucrat. It has seen empires rise and fall, and it has outlasted every attempt to pave it over. The tension in the air of our cities is the tension of this rejection. The buildings are cracking because the energy they are trying to suppress is too great for the concrete to hold. We are witnessing a slow-motion explosion of truth. Ask yourself, when the concrete finally shatters, will you be standing on the graft or will you be standing on the foundation? The investigate continues into the dark, where the only light is the glow of the stones they told us were just rocks. The institutional gatekeeping is a thin veil over a vast unsettling reality. We have been raised in the shadow of giants, told they were just mountains. We have been governed from the roofs of temples, told they were just offices. The investigative essayist knows that the smallest anomaly, a red stone in a grey wall, a hum in a silent room, is the key to the entire labyrinth. We are being invited to see the world not as it is described, but as it is constructed. The pattern is global. The erasure is methodical. The knowledge is forbidden. But the loop is still open. What if the office you work in is the only thing keeping the world from being free? What if the paper you file is the weight that keeps the stone from singing? The investigation is not just about the buildings. It is about the foundations of our own perception. The institutional gatekeeping of the subterranean world requires a constant localized presence. I spent the winter months tracking the deep infrastructure permits in the city of Philadelphia. These permits allow for excavation beyond the 30-foot mark, a depth typically reserved for heavy transit or classified telecommunications. But the maps don't show transit lines here. They show a void. I followed a crew into a site near the old customs house, where the modern street level sits nearly 20 feet above the original cobblestones of the 18th century. As they peeled back the asphalt, they didn't find dirt. They found the roof of a cathedral. It was made of a non-oxidizing alloy that looked like gold, but possessed the tensile strength of industrial steel. The workers were immediately replaced by a private security detail wearing patches with no insignia. Not a utility repair, not a construction site, a recovery operation. The government offices in this district are not built on the ground. They are built on the ceilings of a buried metropolis. Ask yourself why every major city is sinking at exactly the same rate. It isn't the soil, it's the weight of the concealment. The mud flood narrative is the most significant point of friction in the institutional erasure. Official historians call it a conspiracy theory, a convenient label to dismiss the physical evidence of 10-foot tall doorways half buried in the earth. But look at the technical terms of load distribution in buildings like the Chicago Board of Trade or the New York City Hall. These structures feature massive, ornate archways that lead directly into the dirt. They were not built as light wells. They were the main entrances of a civilization that existed before the layers of silt were deposited. The government didn't build these cities. They excavated the upper floors and turned the buried lower levels into utility tunnels. They used the institutional gatekeeping of archaeology to ensure that no one ever asks where the mud came from or why the history books begin exactly when the digging ended. Not an accident of nature, not a fluke of geology. A reset. I obtained a series of thermal imaging scans from a source within the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. The scans show the ghost heat of the city's administrative district. In a standard urban environment, heat dissipates through the atmosphere, but these images show heat being drawn downward into the red porphyry foundations. The stones are behaving like heat sinks for a massive underground thermal electric generator. The government offices are the radiators for this system. They stay warm in the winter, not because of the boilers in their basements, but because they are venting the excess energy of the earth machine they are sitting on. We are paying heating bills to a state that is harvesting free energy from the very ground beneath our feet. This is the ultimate scam of the administrative state. They have privatized the planetary life force and sold it back to us as a utility, not a service, not a benefit, an extraction. Consider the technical terms of the erasure. We are told about urban renewal, gentrification, and infrastructure modernization. These are the euphemisms for the destruction of the evidence. Every time a grand stone-clad building is demolished to make room for a glass and steel box, the gate is being reinforced. The glass box has no foundation, and it sits on a concrete slab that further seals the old world away. I found a classified memo from the General Services Administration regarding the decommissioning of resonance active sites. The memo specifies that any building containing pre-1850 masonry of unknown origin must be targeted for remediation. This is a scorched earth policy against history. They are replacing the resonant, healing architecture of the old world with the dissonant, draining architecture of the new. Not a choice of style, not an economic necessity, a frequency war. The investigator's rhythm is the rhythm of the shovel hitting stone, staccato, persistent, unforgiving. I tracked the lineage of the architectural dynasties that designed the major government offices of the 20th century. They all belong to the same hermetic societies. They all utilize the same geometric ratios, the same sacred geometry used to build the cathedrals and the star forts. But they are using it in reverse. Where the old world used geometry to open the mind, the new world uses it to close it. The government offices are designed as psychic anchors. They are placed at the intersections of natural energy flows to act as dams. They stop the flow. They create a stagnation of the spirit. Ask yourself why the air in a federal building feels heavy, why the light feels artificial, even when it comes from a window. It is because the building is a filter. It is stripping the life out of the atmosphere before it reaches you. The language of the state is a language of not. You are not allowed in the basement. This is not an ancient structure. The stone is not synthetic. Through this constant negation, they create a reality that is defined by its boundaries rather than its centre. But the centre is where the red porphyry sits. I discovered that the red mercury found in the Cincinnati tunnels is also present in the fire suppression systems of the Pentagon. It isn't used to put out fires, it's used to stabilize the building's internal magnetic field. The entire complex is a massive, low-frequency transmitter. It is broadcasting a compliance signal that mirrors the alpha waves of the human brain. The government offices are not just where the laws are written. They are where the laws are beamed into our subconscious. Not influence, not persuasion, entrainment. What if the great discoveries of the 1800s were actually rediscoveries managed by the state? The Patent Office is perhaps the most heavily guarded government office of all. It is the filter through which the technology of the old world is drip-fed to the public. I found records of a thermal atmospheric collector patented in 1892 that was immediately classified and the inventor institutionalized. The technology was identical to the spires found on the old Tartarian capitals. The state didn't want the world to have free power. They wanted a world where power had to be bought. They took the crowns off the buildings and replaced them with meters. The institutional erasure is not just about the past. It is about the theft of our future. We are living in a technological dark age that is disguised as an era of high-tech progress. The somber tone of the investigation reflects the scale of the loss. We are walking through a graveyard of giants and calling it a business district. I stood in the lobby of the Department of the Interior and looked at the murals. They depict the conquest of the wilderness, the taming of the land. But if you look at the background of the paintings, you can see the ruins. The artists knew. They were ordered to paint trees over the arches and mountains over the domes, but the shapes are still there. The wilderness was a city. The conquest was a clean-up. The government offices are the monuments to this victory of the small over the great. They are the drab, grey lids on a world of colour and light. The erasure trope works because it relies on our own laziness. We don't want to look beneath the pavement. We don't want to believe that our leaders are actually the jailers of our history. But the skepticism of authority is the first step toward the foundation. I found a hollow point in the granite wall of the Supreme Court building. I tapped it and heard not the dull thud of stone, but the ringing of a bell. The wall is a shell. Behind it lies a series of copper coils, part of the original justice resonance of the site. The state has covered the coils in lead to keep them silent. They have muted the earth so they can speak for it. Ask yourself, if the stone is a bell, who is the one who silenced it? And what happens when the bell finally rings again? The philosophical open loop of the 10th part is the inevitability of the return. The red porphyry is expanding. The ghost heat is rising. The institutional gatekeeping is failing because the foundations are beginning to surface. In some parts of the city, the mud is literally being washed away by the rain, revealing the forbidden floors below. The government offices are starting to lean. They are being pushed from below by the very history they tried to bury. The investigation is no longer about looking for evidence. It is about preparing for the collapse. The somber tone is the calm before the storm. The red stone is the signal. The foundations are coming back to the light, not as ruins, but as the hardware of a world that is waking up. The loop is closing. The investigation is becoming a witness. The pressure within the subvaults has reached a point of physical distortion. I returned to the municipal records building to find the red porphyry seam had widened by nearly 3 centimetres. It is breathing. I spent the last 72 hours charting the structural harmonics of the administrative district during a minor seismic event. While the modern concrete buildings shuddered with a chaotic, destructive frequency, the red porphyry foundations remained perfectly still, vibrating at a constant 7.83 Hertz. This is the Schumann resonance, the heartbeat of the earth. The government offices are not just sitting on this stone, they are bracing against it. They are trying to insulate themselves from a frequency that aligns human biology with the planetary field. By living and working in these grey boxes, we are being physically desynchronized from the Earth's natural timing. Not a workspace, not a civic centre, a frequency isolator. I managed to acquire a set of reclamation ledgers from the 1920s, hidden in the false ceiling of a condemned library. The ledgers don't list construction materials, they list yields. They describe atmospheric harvesters salvaged, mercury cores stabilized, and copper resonators melted for currency. This is the institutional erasure of the energy grid in its most literal form. They took the very devices that provided the old world with abundance and turned them into the coins that would fund our scarcity. They turned the hardware of freedom into the software of debt. The government offices are the accountants of this grand theft. They are the locations where the salvaged technology of a high civilization was processed into the mundane tools of the 20th century state. Not progress, not innovation, a managed decline. The urban exploration of the capital's water system revealed a truth even more unsettling. The city's main aqueducts are not 19th century brickwork. They are pre-cataclysmic conduits lined with a ceramic glass that prevents friction and bacterial growth. I found sections where the modern repair crews had installed lead pipes directly into the glass tunnels. They are intentionally degrading the quality of the lifeblood of the city. Why? Because the original water system was designed to carry more than just H2O. It was structured water, energized by the geometric layout of the city and the red porphyry foundations. The state doesn't want us drinking living water. They want us drinking as a chemically neutralized, energetically dead fluid that reinforces our state of biological amnesia. The government offices are the valves that control this degradation. Consider the technical terms of zoning and land use. These are the legal mechanisms used by the institutional gatekeepers to prevent anyone from digging where they shouldn't. I discovered that the historic preservation zones in most major cities are placed exactly over the most sensitive nodes of the old grid. They preserve the buildings to ensure no one can ever look underneath them. They are not protecting the architecture, they are protecting the burial site. If you attempt to renovate a basement in these zones, you are met with a wall of bureaucratic red tape. They require specialist surveys conducted by state-approved firms. These firms are the narrative janitors. Their job is to find the anomalies first, remove them, and then sign off on a clear report. The offices are the headquarters for this systematic monitoring of the soil. The staccato rhythm of my investigation has led me to the realization that we are not living in the aftermath of a collapse, but in the middle of a prolonged occupation. The government offices are the outposts of the occupiers. They use the staccato, rhythmic language of policy and mandate to drown out the continuous flowing melody of the stones. Not this, not that. Something else. A civilization that understood the $1.618 golden ratio not as a decorative flourish, but as a fundamental law of physics. I found a hidden chamber in the basement of the Department of Commerce where the walls were shaped like a nautilus shell. Standing in the center, your voice echoes with a clarity that feels impossible. It is a chamber of truth. The state uses it as a storage room for obsolete paper records. They are burying the truth in the very place designed to amplify it. Our administrative centers are energetic voids designed to drain human vitality through ionized air and electromagnetic shielding. These structures act as batteries, siphoning life force into subterranean red porphyry foundations, the true national debt measured in vitality, not currency. Institutional gatekeepers justify this erasure as public safety, yet hidden archives reveal suppressed wireless technologies that once harnessed free atmospheric energy. The state didn't innovate. It replaced a world of abundance with a metered, controlled cage. The narrative is cracking. From buried ballrooms to the resonant geometry of star forts, the forbidden knowledge of a superior past is resurfacing. The red porphyry vibrates with the Earth's frequency, shaking the grey concrete of bureaucracy. We are living on the roof of a stolen history. As the stones begin to sing and the foundations fail, we must ask, will we finally find the stairs and reclaim ourselves?